All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Olivia, the Arts Administrator here at the Pump House Regional Arts Center. And today I'm joined by Daphnae Koop to discuss her current exhibition, currently in our front gallery from January 11th, 2023 to February 25th, 2023. She currently works with wood, recycled materials, glass, and other natural objects to create richly textured paintings. Welcome, Daphne, and thank you for sitting down with me today to discuss your work. Would you mind introducing yourself and your past in the art world?
Okay, hi everybody, I'm Daphnae Koop. I am currently a Minneapolis-based artist. I have lived in Minneapolis for the past 22 years, spent about 20 years prior to that in New York City. I would say I've been an artist for probably close to 50 years now. It really started for me in high school, and I pretty much scheduled myself in high school. I did all of my classes pretty much independently so that I could spend my afternoons in the art studio, and pretty much took it from there. I attended 4 different colleges, and I can attest to the fact that if you switch schools often enough, you can avoid all required classes and end up taking pretty much only electives, which for me were art and literature. So I kind of got through college, ultimately graduating from the College of Art and Design. I show my work pretty regularly. I have shown in most of the art centers in the Midwest. Well, actually, most of the art centers in Minnesota, certainly in the Twin Cities area. But I've also shown my work in Illinois, Nebraska, Wisconsin, the bulk of the Midwest, the Dakotas. And I've also shown my work quite a bit on the East Coast, particularly prior to leaving New York. Anything else you want to know for that particular question?
Yeah, of course. During all of these years of creating artwork, have you pretty much stayed focused in this more sculptural work, or have you done other mediums as well?
Okay, so I call myself a painter and pretty much always have, but the paintings that I do have never been traditional. Paper, canvas, smooth surfaces don't really talk to me. So when I was living in New York, I was actually doing most of my work on something called Durarock or backerboard for bathrooms. It's almost a crumbling fresco kind of a surface. And I had largely finished with that body of work when I moved back here, and spent a bit of time casting about for where my work was going to go next. The working with wood happened largely accidentally. My husband was doing construction projects. He was bringing small scraps of, little squares of wood back that were, mostly maple, beautiful little squares. And I started painting on those. That was boring. So then I started gouging them, and that got a little more interesting. So then I started carving them. The larger pieces, putting them, my grandmother taught me how to make quilts when I was a kid, and putting the larger pieces together for me was almost like putting together a quilt. I had all these small scraps of wood and just started piecing them as though I was putting together a blanket. And then of course I carved the surface. The entire surface of all of my panels is carved, mallet and chisels. And for me, that is, number one, taking the smoothness of the milled surface away. But number two, there's a way that I'm trying to reclaim almost the spirit of the lumber, the spirit of the wood, by giving it the richness of texture that it would have in the natural world. So I do carve each individual board within a piece with its own texture, its own patterning. And it, in a way, for me, is kind of like trying to create individuality within a cohesive whole, kind of like if we had like a cohesive society, giving each piece its voice, but allowing that voice to be part of a unified whole. Does that answer the question, or did I go someplace else?
No, I think that answers it perfectly. Discusses how
Okay.
you've called yourself a painter, but your paintings are much more different than what people tend to traditionally think as painting. So,
Yep. But
yeah.
I guess the point with all of that for me is that I'm taking all of these things that have nothing to do with each other. So the wood, the glass, different pieces of wood, different types of wood. I'm taking all of that and I'm putting it together and trying to create one piece out of all of this stuff. And it's the color, it's the richness of the surface and the application of paint that is ultimately what pulls it all together. So I guess that's where the paint part of it is the magic for me.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, as we move into the work that you have here currently at the Pump House, this is one of the first works that we'll be discussing today, Heaven Comes So Near. Would you like to discuss a little bit of your inspiration surrounding this exhibit as a whole?
So the inspiration for the exhibit as a whole, really, I have work and I was trying, because I'm in one, area where you can pretty much see everything in that one area. I wanted to bring pieces, individual pieces that would actually rhyme or speak to each other. It's kind of like, I don't want to put beige and fuchsia together in one space. Not that I work with beige or fuchsia much, but so I was really trying to create a fairly cohesive exhibit. The individual pieces that I brought, I brought them largely because of the palette. Again, trying to keep pieces that would pull your eye into the next piece and not jar your eye from the next piece. The piece that you're showing right now is actually one of my favorites. I would say the inspiration for this and the inspiration for much of my work is medieval art and architecture. This particular painting, Heaven Comes So Near, I titled it in that way because of the little splotch of red down on the bottom center that looks toward the kind of golden red above. And there's a way for me that speaks to how we look to the heavens or look to the sky for our sense of heaven, for our sense of the eternal. The palette in this particular piece is really reminiscent of medieval altarpieces or medieval manuscripts. A lot of that rich blue, the reds, and the gilding, the gold that comes along with that particular palette. And then the glass for me is always a stand-in for both water and for, again, the eternal, for the sort of the sparkle that you see in the air that kind of reminds you that this world isn't the be all and the end all, that there is something beyond all of this. This is one of the more, I would say, overtly, there are three pieces in the show. This one from Roots Deep Down, and a third one who I can't think of the title right now, but this Passing Dims the Day. Those three were all very much influenced and or inspired, I would say, by the medieval art and architecture, medieval altarpieces, and kind of very specifically following that inspiration in those three pieces.
Yeah, great. And we discussed a little bit before how you do carve each individual piece of wood. Would you mind talking a little bit about your process of attaching the glass? And it doesn't look like there's a film over it. I mean, it's still very individual, pieces. And I'm just wondering about how you're able to achieve that while also still having them so, attached so well.
Yeah, that's where people think I'm nuts. So the glass actually often takes longer than the entire rest of the painting, because I literally have buckets of shattered safety glass, but safety glass doesn't shatter into neat little cubes like that. You actually have to break it up into the individual cubes. So I spend literally hours breaking apart the glass and laying it in. The way that I adhere it is I use a watered down industrial adhesive with a medicine dropper, 1 drop at a time.
Wow.
And so a piece like that piece I believe is about what, 3.5 feet wide. So I would say just the glass alone in that piece probably took me 20-30 hours. And the 1 drop at a time process happens usually, depending on how deep the glass is in a piece, that will happen 4 to 6 times. And so I will literally be bending over a piece with a medicine dropper for hours to adhere the glass. And I do it that way for 2 reasons. One, if I brush something over the glass, it moves the glass. I can't use a brush because the glass won't stay in place. And if I pour a resin into the glass, you lose the individual chunks. And it's the sparkle of the glass that really is the magic of the material. When I lived in New York, I worked with glass like this, not as much, not in kind of areas of glass, but little cubes of glass here and there in pieces. And I would find it on the streets. And it, all of my materials bring history with them. And there's a way that the broken, damaged materials brought to a place of beauty and glory is a really big part of what my process is all about. It's the whole meaning behind the title of the show, Elevating the Ordinary, taking what we would consider to be detritus and bringing it into a state of beauty. The glass itself comes with a history. It's broken. It's often it's something that was broken into, someone who was robbed. So it has this whole emotional and kind of negative content that it carries with it. But it also looks like diamonds. It's utterly beautiful. And so there's a way that juxtaposition of beauty and tragedy, I think, adds to the sort of magic of the work overall.
Yes, definitely. And each piece is just so intricate, which is really great to see in person. So,
thank you.
Yeah. Moving on with this piece as well, Echoes of the Sunset. If you would mind talking just a little bit about this piece.
Okay. First of all, are you able to flip back and forth?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Okay. Flip to the next one then, because I'm going to talk about that one.
Okay.
So this is And Then Forever to Be Gone and Echoes of the Sunset at the same time.
Okay.
Those two are both from the body of work that I do, which is basically, these are my landscapes. And again, it is elevating the ordinary. It's taking what is broken, what was lost, what was last year's life that is this year's compost, and it's putting it into a piece and making it beautiful, making it substantial, giving it new life. So in a way, the landscapes for me are about creating permanence out of what is ephemeral, about giving everlasting life to what has already passed. The Echoes of the Sunset piece, I mean, this one obviously has shells in it. Echoes of the Sunset is bark, it's leaves, again, it's shattered safety glass, but the little bits of nature that are in it are all pieces of nature that we would walk on and ignore as we're, going through our day. And yet bringing them into this painting gives them new life and gives them a new presence, a new, they become the foundation for the rest of the painting. Echoes of the Sunset is you know, it's the sunset, it's the end of the day, it's the sky is growing dark, but you can still see that glorious, glorious red at the edge of the horizon. And that rhyming with the bits of bark and the bits of leaves is just, you know, it's an impression of a place and a time. My landscapes are not pictures of places, they are more like impressions of a specific place at a specific time, at a specific hour. And how do you convey that? How do you convey a sense of place without actually painting a picture of it? The second piece, and then Forever to Be Gone, is, you know, it's very similar. That one obviously is a much more watery piece, both with the use of the seashells, but also the use of the color. You know, the green could be the green of the shore, or it could be murky water. The blue could be the blue of the sky. Again, it could be water. So it's the feel of a place, the feel of a time of day, again, without painting a picture of that particular spot.
Yeah, and speaking of painting, you can see it a little bit up in this area of this close-up, but your paint application has quite a bit of texture as well.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you can see like the layers of
Yes.
the different paint. So could you talk a little bit about, you know, what type of paint you use or how you're able to keep like the layers shining through each other?
Okay. So
yeah.
First of all, the paint is layers and layers. I would say I have paintings that are 70 layers of paint. And I paint with everything laying down flat, and I paint pretty wet. Most of my materials are pools and puddles of paint, not brushed on. They're more like pooled on. I use mostly oil, but I have a bad habit of mixing the unmixable. So I'll throw water into oil. I'll throw acrylic into oil, alcohol. There are ways in which you'll see underlayers shine through because of what I have painted over them that repels what's underneath, so that what's underneath will, you know, reveal itself. And the colors that I paint, they always start out almost day glow, straight out of the tube color. And then as I continue to paint, the layers, they brown down, they become more tertiary, and they become richer. I use a lot of gilding powders or mica powders. I really like the sparkle and shine, but also those gilding powders affect the colors dramatically. So I can take a blue, and rather than add yellow to create a green, I can add gold, you know, like a powdered down gold leaf. And it'll give me a very different kind of a green, but that has a luminescence to it. And that luminescence sometimes, again, depending on how I'm using the materials, I can create a layer that will float over the surface of what is underneath and allow that sparkle to sit on top rather than embed into the surface underneath, or vice versa. I can create a mix where that luminescence actually sinks underneath whatever I've painted and becomes almost like a glow from within. So it really is just how I use the materials.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is, you know, experimenting. I've been doing this particular work on wood for 20 some years. And a lot of it has over the years been experimenting with different materials and seeing how they work. And at this point, I'm pretty confident in my materials and knowing how they work. Although that said, the wood that I use in these pieces is a combination of cast-offs from construction or teardown projects. So the small pieces where they're already shaped or angled, most of the wood like that, that's how I get it. People do construction projects and give me their bits. And I try to use those bits as they come to me, again, honoring their history. But the other wood that I use is, I have a friend who rough mills logs. And those are just logs he finds in the woods. I never know what the wood is, but I get his reject boards, the boards that are no good for construction projects. And that would be the wood that is more wiggly. It doesn't actually have a square shape, or the board doesn't hold its form. And so when I carve all of those pieces, I never quite know how the carving is going to happen, because different pieces carve differently. The texture of different wood is very different. And then when I paint, again, the texture of the different woods is very different. Sometimes I'll end up with a board that it just soaks everything in. And for me to try to do my pooling process and create those layers is almost impossible. And so I don't really know what I'm up against until I actually start the painting part of the process. Actually, I don't know what I'm up against until I start the carving part of the process. And then again, I go through the same thing in the painting part of the process.
Very interesting. Thanks for sharing. And then lastly, we have, so this is the name of this specific piece in a set of, I think, are there 8?
I think I brought 8 of those.
8 of these stone pieces. So
Yes.
This specifically here is a close-up of, but the trailing clouds of glory do we come.
Yep, and it's actually, but trailing clouds, not the trailing clouds.
Yep.
And this will give me an opportunity to talk about my titles a bit, because most of my titles come from poetry. They are excerpts from specific poems. And most of the poetry that I reference comes from probably the 18th and 19th centuries. I use that for a number of reasons, but the biggest reason is that it tends to talk about ideas in a language that I think we all recognize from boring English classes in grade school and high school, but that doesn't specifically tell you what to think. So I'm trying to create titles or add titles that reference the piece, but go past the piece and give you something else to consider when looking at the work. So that's a general notion of how I use my titles. But I'm going to speak more specifically to this body of work, because this one is in some ways easier to get specific with how and why I titled it in this way. So the title, Trailing Clouds of Glory Do We Come, comes from a poem by Wordsworth, Reflections on Early Childhood. And there's a stanza in that poem that speaks to when we are born, we come trailing our souls with us. We come bringing our souls, we come bringing our clouds of glory with us, that we're not mere mortals, that we are creatures with souls that are so much larger and brighter than we are. A quick story, when I was about 16, I was in Paris. I was studying on a summer study trip, and I was in the Paris metro, and I was looking through the window of a car, and there was a woman in the car, and I remember looking at her face thinking, oh my God, that poor woman looks so tired. And she looked up and caught my eye, and the two of us just burst into smiles at each other. And this is 60 years ago, 50 years ago. Yeah, 50 years ago. I'm not that old. This is like 50 years ago, and I still remember it. And what I remember is just how my heart filled looking at her, and the smiles that we shared with each other. And I believe that in that moment, it was not her face, my face looking at each other. I think that it was the grandness of our souls essentially meeting across that platform. And, you know, certainly I've had other experiences like that. I know that they've done Kirlian photography where they see the energy of two people who don't know each other or haven't seen each other in years and they meet across a stage, and you can literally see the energy of them cross the stage and meet in between them. So, there is a way that we are larger than our bodies. Essentially, with this particular series, I am trying to paint the soul of the stone almost as a metaphor for that experience, for the experience that you get when you truly look in somebody's eyes and you see like the grandeur of the person in there and not just the person sitting in front of you. And so I'm taking these simple pieces of wood, very simple carving, just enough to get some texture into the surface. Again, smooth surfaces don't speak to me. Embedding a stone, and then trying to create the feel of the stone, but larger, grander, almost as, again, though I'm painting the soul of each of those little pebbles.
That's
Does that
wonderful.
answer the question?
Yeah, definitely. And even, looking closer at these, you can see some of, in the painting of the wood mirrors, the texture and the colors of the stone.
Mm-hmm.
So seeing how those two, kind of talk with each other is fun to see. So
they are actually the hardest pieces I do. Most of the larger pieces, which look more difficult, it's all playing with color and texture, and it's really just a matter of continuing with the process until the surface starts to unify, all the different parts of the surface come together, and it kind of goes, yes. With these, I rarely finish a piece, have it hanging on the wall, and then say, no good, and repaint it. I have done that more with this series than in my entire history as an artist. These are, the stones are little dictators, and it's, for me to get the kind of, again, the grandeur of the spirit right without overspeaking it is incredibly difficult. So these are the hardest pieces I do.
wow. Well, thank you so much for talking more about them and, bringing a little bit of life to them in this way. It's really fun to hear about. So
Thank you.
yeah. So is there anything you would like viewers to keep in mind when viewing your work in person? This is another one of Daphne's pieces that is in the show here at the Pump House.
I think I don't like to tell viewers what to do. I would rather have a viewer come to the work and see what they see in it, see where it takes them. I've had the experience half a dozen times of people coming in and like literally coming to tears in front of some of my pieces because of where the simple color and texture takes them in their own life, in their own history. And I would rather allow people the freedom to bring themselves to the work and not bring me in between the viewer and the piece. So.
All right. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. I urge everyone to come to our artist reception, which is February 3rd, 5 to 7 p.m. These works are actually absolutely wonderful to see in person. Like we've discussed today, the sparkle and all of those layers really come through seeing them under light. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And thank you, Daphne.
Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to seeing you and whoever shows up on the 3rd. All right.